So here we all are in lockdown, complete in these unprecedented times. We're demonstrating that we can do something that we never thought we could do. Last year there were these big demonstrations about, climate emergency. It's a state of emergency. We can't stop all these flights and we can't stop all this pollution. And then actually we're now demonstrating that we can. We can't disrupt the whole economy. Now we've demonstrated we can. We said we couldn't actually support our services, and now we're showing that we can. So it's a big wake-up call, isn't it? What we human beings could do if we actually had the political will to do it. It's taken this little tiny virus to show us that. And it's quite interesting listening to the media, how much kindness is starting to shine through, like all the divisiveness of recent years of not caring. There's much more caring and discussion about caring and discussion about values going on, which it's the, if you like, that's the upside of this, this crisis really, and all the suffering that it's bringing, all the uncertainty, when you think of all the different difficulties it's brought, not just the fact that more people are dying, more people are getting sick, but people's lives are in jeopardy in all sorts of ways. You think of all the problems we had even before the virus was there, and how much worse all those must now be, and yet there's this other feeling of closer community somehow. I think it's made us much more aware of ourselves as a community, as a nation, or as a world. Nonetheless, it's a time when there must be so many people are so alone. Just one person we've heard of recently connected to someone in our Sangha who died alone. Well, they didn't actually die, did they? They were 3 days on their own sick before they were found and then taken to hospital and died from the virus. And the fear of that, and people already were depressed. I mean, this is kind of like not being able to go out, not being able to meet your friends, and the tension in relationships. I mean, relationships are already tense, but you're all locked up in the same house for months on end, weeks and months on end. It's really very, very difficult. Many people, their work is the one thing that keeps them sane, and then they can't work. So there's going to be a lot of tension building up in many ways. So it's even more important than ever for us to be able to practice love and compassion, and to even think about what that really means. It's interesting, love is something, like if we talk about wisdom and the Buddhist path to awakening, and what's enlightenment, and what's meditation, and what's samadhi, and what's true wisdom. It all sounds like something very grand that perhaps we don't know anything about. But when you say love, we're all experts on love. We all know what love is. And yet, actually, it's not different from wisdom. I mean, that's what wisdom is. It is love, actually. And I think that can get lost a bit, especially when we use mind for wisdom and heart for love. It's easy to lose the sense, which I certainly picked up in the East, where wisdom means love. So a saint means love, whereas I think for us, we tend to think a saint means someone who's good to such an extent they almost show me up. They're kind of too good almost. But I noticed when I was out in the East that saint, or holy person, or Buddha, or God even, meant love, place where I'm safe, where I'll be loved. It's, I feel like the child being loved by this wonderful presence of the Buddha or God or, sort of holy person. You can't separate the two. If there's not love there, then it's not wisdom. There's just in the language, in the culture, it's just like that, which I think can get a bit lost in the West, where there's such a sense of the Buddha is awakened, so he's gone beyond suffering. That's a great achievement. He sits there in his splendor. He's not a very hands-on sort of person. And because of that, I thought I'd read you one story from the life of the Buddha, which is not so well known as Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, but it's the same image. Once the Blessed One was inspecting all the living spaces at a particular Vihara. It's not something you associate with the Buddha, is it? He's going around inspecting what the monks, how they're getting on, what their quarters are like, with an Ananda alongside him. And they came to one dwelling where there was a monk lying covered in his own urine and feces. And when the Buddha saw that, he talked with the man and found out that he had dysentery and that no one was taking care of him because the other bhikshus had simply given him up for dead. They just kind of left him to it. Then the Blessed One told Ananda to fetch water. Together they washed the man, the two of them. It's very touching, isn't it? Then the Buddha took him at the head and Ananda at the feet, and they lifted him onto a bed and made him as comfortable as they could. So, this wonderful, serene, sort of beyond it all kind of Buddha actually was very hands-on. Then the Blessed One called the bhikshus of that place together and asked them if they knew there was a man lying sick there with dysentery. And they said, "We know there is, Lord." "And why is no one taking care of him?" he asked. This is a stupid answer. "He's no longer any use to the community," they responded. This is where people can get the impression that Buddhism is about detachment and, kind of a bit head in the clouds, just about, looking into navel gazing. That's what people say, don't they? But, we're busy doing our Buddhist thing, our Dharma, our Buddhist thing of detachment or whatever. And so the Buddha has to respond. In the Sangha, the Blessed One told them, "We have no mother or father or relatives to look after us. If we don't look after one another, who will look after us?" Then he made it a rule that if someone is sick, his instructor, this is interesting, his instructor or his teacher should look after him. It's interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. That part of your responsibility as a teacher is to actually look after your students. Or someone who has or someone who has the same teacher or instructor. So somebody in the same Sangha, the same mandala, should look after them until either he recovers or dies. And he made it a serious offence to overlook this rule. So this was actually within his own community of monks, that they have to the teacher or instructor has to look after them, make sure they're looked after. Yeah. So that's quite a good indication for us as a Sangha, isn't it? That it's actually a very strict rule for a Sangha to look after each other and in general. So that's a sort of nitty-gritty, hands-on love and compassion, isn't it? That we might talk about love in more elevated way, like you talk about the Buddha is the you could say it is the state of awakening that is timeless. It doesn't go anywhere. It's all pervading. It's here right now. And we can open our hearts and sense that. We can have images that somehow focus our mind on that, and that the image carries that message of love and compassion present right here in the world, in available to our senses. Maybe they don't always. I mean, maybe you look at the images and they just look a bit kind of aloof and distant, but they're supposed to make you feel the love and compassion of the Buddha's right there with you in a way that we can access. So, on all levels, love and compassion is operating on all levels. And when we go beyond suffering, that's when we realize our nature and the nature of all beings is exactly the same, and that in our hearts we're all joined and connected, and our love and compassion does actually reach all beings. When that wisdom arises, it is compassion, and it does affect all beings, so that as the Buddha becomes enlightened, the whole world shakes. The whole universe shakes. It's like everybody's shaken because everyone's affected by it. So it's not a sort of namby-pamby, sloppy sort of emotion. It's what it's all about, actually. Now, last week, I think it was the Today program, they were reading poems. They read this poem, and it was just amazing. It's from The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. So I want us to have this in mind as well. We have the down-to-earth Buddha clearing up this his disciple on the one hand, and then you have where that's coming from, the timelessness of what love truly is. So, and an astronomer said, "Master, what of time?" And he answered, You would measure time. You would measure time, the measureless and immeasurable. You would adjust your conduct and even direct the course of your spirit according to hours and seasons. Of time, you would make a stream upon whose bank you would sit and watch its flowing. Yet, you would do that, yet the timeless in you is aware of life's timelessness and knows that yesterday is but today's memory and tomorrow is today's dream. And that which sings and contemplates in you is still dwelling within the bounds of that first moment which scattered the stars into space. Who among you does not feel that his power to love is boundless? And yet, who does not feel that very love, though boundless, encompassed within the center of his being? And moving not from love thought to love thought, nor from love deeds to other love deeds. And is not time, even as love is, undivided and paceless? But if in your thought you must measure time into seasons, let each season encircle all the other seasons, and let today embrace the past with remembrance and the future with longing. Brilliant, isn't it? So well written. And really captures the point. One of the points I wanted to make today was how we tend to associate developing love and compassion with thinking. I have to think more loving thoughts, which, as we're practicing, that's perhaps what we're doing. But he's making the point that actually boundless love isn't lots of love thoughts. I love the way he says lots of love deeds and lots of love thoughts. It's not doing, actually. It's something that's outside of time. It's something that awakens within you. It is, if you like, using DHB, DHB language, it is openness, clarity, sensitivity itself. So when you connect to the openness, clarity, sensitivity of your being, as it ultimately is, without the thinking, the grasping at thinking, it already is love. That's what it is. That's what openness, clarity, sensitivity is. So when you say, well, openness is emptiness, it's something that you have to realize about how you're deluded and you have to let go of your grasping and so on. It's the same movement as when you open out to somebody and you don't think about yourself, you just think about caring for them, empathizing with them, recognizing them as a being that you wish to help. You're already linking into emptiness. That is what emptiness is like. There's no division between yourself and others. So automatically that wish to remove their suffering just flows forth without even thinking about it. It's what people notice when they are acting compassionately. They notice, well, I didn't do anything. I didn't think anything. It just, what else was I going to do? It would have been harder to not do something because that would have required a decision or making, like some sort of action. But to act out of love and compassion, you don't have to think about it, actually, if you're connected into it. So it's quite interesting hearing about what certainly people on the front line in the national health, but also in various other fields, people feel very involved with contributing to and working together with other people to contribute to removing the sufferings of others. And every time, I'm sure, every time somebody leaves the hospital cured, there's a sense of tremendous joy on the part of the staff. Even though there's a lot of suffering and pain, what makes it worthwhile is a sense of joy because somebody's better. That's what it's all about, is to protect others, and every time that happens, there's automatically a joyfulness that arises from that, which you don't think about. It's just naturally there, that kind of response. So this relates to the first two of the apramanas. I don't know if you're all familiar with this term, apramanas. Sometimes they're called the four measurelessnesses, and they're sometimes called the four Brahma Viharas. And you find this in every form of Buddhism. This is fundamental, and every day we do this. We do it in the morning, first thing, and we do it in the second session of the day with our Shakyamuni Puja. We recite and reflect on the four immeasurables: immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable I'm hesitating because the word in Sanskrit is mudita, and it's needs a bit of explaining, but let's say it's the rejoicing in the good of others and immeasurable equalness or equanimity. I think the word implies both. There's this. In fact, it's describing the Buddha nature or the bodhicitta. Like we also sing the verse, "May the bodhicitta arise in those in whom it hasn't arisen. May it, where it has arisen, may it progress, develop to its completeness in all beings." So that's again another way of expressing the same four immeasurables. May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully. So the idea is, as you say that, you're thinking of the immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable mudita, and immeasurable equalness, equally for all beings, and that all beings have that same realization. So it's as big as you can get. It's not small thinking, it's complete thinking and turning your heart and mind towards all beings throughout time and space. So at a time like this, when we're very aware of how widespread suffering is, it feels like it's suddenly become far more intense and visible than perhaps we normally think of it. But actually, the suffering of samsara is always intense and all-pervading and everywhere and unbearable. So what's happening in the world today is an example of how we tend to not realize just how all-pervading and suffering is, or intense it is. But every time we turn our heart and mind open to that quality within ourselves of feeling that, I say feeling it, or that recognition that is our nature, and it is the nature of others, does actually affect the whole world, or it does affect beings. And of course, if we all draw together and do it in a very strong way, we produce a sort of epicenter, so that those beings that we're most closely connected to will be most strongly affected. So, in an immediate sense. So, people's instinct to kind of do praying together or doing practice together to help the present situation, it's right on all levels, even if you only recognize it's working on a psychological level, so everybody feels better about it. But I think it does work on an even deeper level. So when we look at those four Brahma Viharas, they're called Brahma Viharas because they're the dwellings of Brahma, the great God. So if you practice love and compassion, you make good karma. And it's a very positive state of mind. It produces happy states of mind. It produces the most happy state of mind, which would be a god or like Brahma. But it doesn't necessarily lead to liberation just on its own. So that's why they're called Brahma Viharas. Even though Brahma's love and compassion is all-pervading and it's for all beings equally, there's still something missing in terms of understanding suffering and subtle grasping. And so not necessarily liberated from samsara, even though occupying a very wonderful place within samsara, and there would be nothing wrong with that, except it doesn't go on forever. It comes to an end because it's conditioned. So you have to have that extra quality. This is what the Buddha's special feature is, of going beyond all grasping at views, even subtle grasping at views. And if you look at the Metta Sutta, it describes how you dwell, whether you're walking, sitting, sleeping, or whatever you're doing, you're always pervaded with this love and compassion for all beings equally. And if you combine that with no grasping at views, this subtle grasping at existence or not existence, then that would actually be the liberating aspect of it. And that would be a complete practice. That would actually bring liberation. So, and you can see that if you're completely full of love and compassion, negative thoughts don't arise, do they? But then if you grasp at a view, even with love and compassion can turn into desire, and desire can quickly turn into anger and hatred. So, you may have this great concern for environment, which is full of love and compassion, and wanting to help all beings, and then you adopt that as your view, and you start to get very self-righteous about it and insisting that, I'm right and other people are wrong. And then other people do things that is really wrong, and you are incensed with anger and hatred, and you might do something really violent. Or you might become very despondent and take your own life or something like that. So that clinging to views, even though the impulse is coming from love and compassion, the clinging to views can just pull you right back into the depths of samsara. So that's something that one has to bear in mind. It's not that you have to dumb down your love and compassion. It's that you intensify the love and compassion at the same time as letting go of clinging to views, which is what is called wisdom. That's the wisdom aspect, if you like, of the bodhicitta. Realizing emptiness is realizing that everything you grasp and try to hold, even subtle views, actually are the world of suffering. They are samsara. It's still samsara, even though it seems wonderful. It's still suffering. So these two have to be kept always in mind. And that's right the way through. That's right through the Pali Canon, right through the Mahayana Sutras, right through the Tantras. It's the essence of the Dharma. So let's go through them line by line. And I really like the first opening lines of may all beings be happy. May I and all beings be happy. They don't always put in I, but I think there's a tendency for us in particular to project love and compassion outwards, as if somehow we could ignore ourselves. And there's this feeling of, well, Buddhism is about recognizing not self, so obviously you don't want to focus on yourself. And so you sort of try to jump over self and ignore yourself, not really be aware of what you're feeling and what you're thinking, busily trying to help others. And actually that can sometimes, well, it is actually a kind of clinging to a view. I don't matter. View. It's a view. You're holding on to it. And that actually blocks the naturalness of your natural sensitivity. So it's not that you have to love yourself. You don't have to make yourself an object. You have an idea of yourself and then love it. It's like dropping any idea of yourself. You don't need an idea of yourself, but you do need to recognize, your innermost experience. Like, what is your innermost experience? What do you really want? Like, may I be happy? What would happiness be? And I was thinking about it, all the different ways that I find I can link into happiness. And I was thinking about crowds of people who are happy. Like when everybody came out on their, onto the street and were clapping the National Health workers. That was a moment of happiness and shared happiness, wasn't it? So that everyone that was happy, it must happen in a big football crowd or in a choir or when people are gathered doing something together and they're happy. This feeling of you're really happy with the other people that are around you. You're just happy, and sometimes we forget that's what we actually want. We want everyone to be happy. So when we get angry with people and we don't like them, it's because they're not happy. If they were happy and they were pleased with me and they were pleased and they weren't a problem, I wouldn't feel antagonism towards them. It's because they're not only blocking my happiness, but they in themselves are not happy. Although you could say, well, sometimes you feel jealous when other people are happy. But that's actually why it's so important to recognize your own happiness. Like if you feel happy, you don't feel jealous if other people are happy. But if you've actually attached to the view, I'm this miserable person, look at them, you can't even feel a sense of uplift that other people are happy. But if you were really happy, that wouldn't happen. You would want everyone to be happy. In fact, people not being happy would mar your happiness to some extent. And in the Discovering the Heart of Buddhism explorations, I really get you to spend time finding what is that in your heart of hearts, what would be happy, what would be really happy. And maybe you wouldn't use the word happy. You say, what really makes me cheerful? What really cheers me up? What puts me in a good mood? What does that good mood feel like more? I mean, some things seem to be what contribute to it, but what is that good mood in itself? What is that? That I'd like to be in a good mood all the time. I want more of that. I want more of that happiness and cheerfulness. I want more of that. I want that to go on. I want it to continue. I want it to penetrate me. I want it all the time. What is that? What is that you're really wanting? And that's happiness. And that's the love that you're wanting for yourself. And then by extension, I want it for everyone. So love is very happy, actually. Love, very, very happy. Boundless happiness. Just may all beings be happy like that. So it's really connecting to something we really already want. It's discovering something we already want. We want everyone to be happy. And if it doesn't seem like we do want them to be happy, if you look, you find always, actually, I'd have to say, I would dare to say, it's because you're holding a view. And often the view is, well, not everybody can be happy. It's not possible. So it's a view, isn't it? But you still actually, that's what you would want if it were possible. So it's a view that's stopping you moving towards that or linking into that. And of course, what's the cause of happiness then? You'd have to say the main cause is our true nature. Openness, clarity, sensitivity. Sensitivity is joyfulness, happiness. Sensitivity, the main cause of happiness is our true nature. But then you could also say it's the results of our karma. So if you find yourself in a very happy situation, it's because you've cultivated love and compassion in former lives, or the actions that flow from that. And that's produced now a happy situation. And in that happy situation, it's easy to be happy. And then it's easy to feel love and wish that for yourself and others. But karma isn't just like karma is just ripening moment by moment. So just the fact that sometimes it's easy to be full of love and compassion, sometimes it's not. It's different karma that's ripening. And it's different kleshas, it's different mental poisons that are getting in the way, which takes us straight away into the next of the upper manas, which is compassion. It's a funny word, compassion, because for many people, when they hear compassion, they hear pity, and they don't want pity, and they don't want to pity others. It's kind of a bit like, yes, feeling sorry for other people from a kind of high position. Obviously, that's not what's meant, but maybe the word for you is tainted. In which case you need to find another word. But it's that quality, which again, like love, is a power that removes suffering. So when you feel compassion for yourself, it's that feeling of wishing yourself free from suffering, which is what actually enables you to free yourself from suffering. If you didn't have that wish to free yourself from suffering, you wouldn't free yourself from suffering, would you? So it has a power in it. So if I just say, oh, I'm suffering, there's nothing I can do about it, I'm holding on to a view, there's nothing I can do about it, then you're more and more stuck in it. Whereas if you have the view that actually I could do something that would actually help me to step out of suffering, that's compassion. That wish to remove suffering. And that wish to remove suffering can take the form of if you actually recognize the real cause of suffering, then the measures you take to remove suffering will be effective, and then you have to move towards awakening. But even in everyday life, we have ways that we can actually avoid the suffering in the immediate situation for ourselves and for others, and take care of ourselves, you might say, and in that sense, be in touch with our own feelings and what we need in order to be able to function well, sustain our life and our position in the world, be able to maintain that in a stable way. We do need to take care of ourselves. So that you could say is a kind of compassion, where compassion starts, so that from that place you're then able to do the same for others. So it does mean you need to recognize and empathize with suffering, both in yourself and others. So it's like, again, it is openness, clarity, sensitivity. It's that natural response to suffering, which, as the Buddha pointed out, the suffering is always caused by a wrong view, holding on to a wrong view. If you weren't holding on to a wrong view, then your love for beings would express itself in a way that was removing their suffering by various means, coming from a very deep sense of connection with other beings, because you recognize their nature. And it is just what you're doing all the time without even thinking about it. But for us, when we see other people suffering, when we're suffering, there's a tendency to turn against ourselves, isn't there? Like, I shouldn't be suffering. I should be better. I should be able to cope. I should... you can get quite judgmental, when you're suffering. And then when you see other people suffering, well, they should do this, they should do that, they shouldn't the other. So that it gets very judgmental and unkind. So compassion is really recognizing the nature of suffering, really, both in yourself and in others. And this is what the Buddha did. He recognized, what is the cause of suffering? What is the cause of happiness? What is the cause of suffering? Why does we end up suffering? And it's because we're holding these wrong views, and those wrong views then lead to wrong actions, And those wrong actions lead to negative situations in which those negative emotions arise, and the negative emotions then are fed by more the same wrong views, and that then feeds into more bad karma, which then produces more suffering. So that whole cycle of the based on the wrong views, which is not recognizing our true nature, then grasping on to things that are not true, then that turning into greed, hate, and delusion, to put it in short, but to all the different negative emotions, which leads to karmic results, which bring more suffering and pain. And then at the point where you're most deluded, you get the most negative kind of situation to deal with, so that the whole thing is escalating and going downwards. So that is what's causing samsara. So when you say, may all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, may they ultimately be free of the wrong views that are firing the kleshas, which is firing the karma, which is firing these negative situations, which is then this vicious cycle. So may they be free, not just in the immediate present, but also may they be free in the sense that they've seen the real cause of it and be free of that and all the consequences of those causes, of that cause of not wrong views. So this very strong association between the emotional sense, heart feeling of wishing beings to be free from suffering, really completely together with wishing them to realize the wisdom of letting go of all views, all wrong views, or all grasping views, so that rather than trying to fix everything, like I think in the West we want to fix samsara. Samsara shouldn't be that bad, the world should actually somehow be fixed so that people don't suffer. Well, if people are still grasping a wrong view, they will suffer, whatever happens. You can't fix the world. So what you really want to be focused on is to wish that beings would realize what it is that actually is fueling the whole cycle of samsara. And to keep that in mind. Obviously we're like the Buddha. I mean, he didn't sort of say, well, look, you've got diarrhea and everybody's abandoned you. It's obviously your bad karma and walk on. He kind of dealt with the situation as it was. But at the same time, his main mission was to teach beings how to go beyond the views that are actually keeping the cycle of samsara going. So it's like holding it at all levels, isn't it? You're holding it on a practical level, day-to-day level, and you're holding it at that deeper level where you're wishing beings to actually go beyond samsara itself. So that would be the deepest compassion, and this is seen as, the great saints or the great world leaders, religious leaders, the Buddha himself. He's seen as compassionate because he brings this teaching into the world and enables us to recognize the real cause of suffering and the real source of happiness. And what can you do more than that? What is more compassionate than that? So you don't have to kind of frenetically rush around trying to do everything to save all beings from suffering. It's like keep really focused on what is the real cause of suffering, remove it from yourself, and then you have the power to help others to remove it from themselves. So this is, if you like, this is true love and compassion, to be able to do that for others. So then we come to the third one, which is Mudita. It's quite interesting because it actually means rejoicing in the good of others. So why is this singled out as a special quality over and above the causes of happiness? Because obviously this is a cause of happiness, isn't it? And I think the clue is in the way that line has been changed in the Mahayana version of it, the one that we recite. We say, and may they have the happiness of complete awakening. that never diminishes or fails. So it's really emphasizing that it's important to have in mind the real quality of the Buddhas, of awakened ones. Their quality is to be able to awaken beings because they have seen the cause of suffering and the cessation of suffering, and they've actually taught it in the world. This is, if we look up to that and rejoice in that, then actually that is what we will come to realize and embody through that mudita. It's almost like when you think of Sudana meeting all his teachers on his way to awakening. He just rejoices in their good qualities, and by rejoicing in their qualities, when he's got to the 56th one, I think it is, he actually finds he has those qualities himself, and he is being praised by the gods and humans as having the very qualities that he was actually worshipping, if you like, in his teachers. So it takes it to a whole different level, doesn't it? On any level, if you see good qualities in others and you wish them happiness, you will be happy to see their qualities at whatever level that is. So, if they're doing good, you feel really happy to see them doing good. So when I think of the national health workers and I think of all you people practicing Dharma, I feel really happy. Actually, that increases my happiness at the good they're doing, and so intensifies my tendency to do that. So if we're going to take that to the nth degree, we're going to look at the Buddhas. What is the Buddha doing that we need to rejoice in? So that actually we start to embody that simply through being open to it in that way. So mudita is a wonderful quality, and one that I think in the West as a society, there's a tendency to have lost sight of, because we're so competitive, aren't we? So if we see somebody doing really well, we think that's almost like a judgment on us. Oh, I'm not doing so well, so that makes me not so good. So therefore I have to try harder. I have to somehow, oh, that's good. They're not actually as good as they seem to be. So that means I'm not so as bad as I thought I was. So that, it's almost like you take pleasure in seeing the faults of others, because then that makes me feel that I'm not so bad in comparison, which is a really negative way of thinking. But I think, I think we all recognize it in ourselves, don't we, to some degree, that we would rather see the feet of clay. We'd rather see somebody wasn't as good as they were made out to be. The press in particular really enjoys that. It's like we like to read news about that. Oh, they're not as good as they seem to be. Which is very negative, very, very negative, because we're then focusing on what's negative. Obviously, then it's the opposite of mudita. We're going to start to think smaller and lower and in more mean way. Whereas if we're actually thinking somebody's done a good thing, isn't that wonderful? Well, maybe it wasn't as wonderful as it seemed, but just thinking it was wonderful, well, if only they had have done that, okay, so they didn't do it. So, but anyway, maybe next time they will, sort of with a sense of, wouldn't it be wonderful if they really did do that? You can see in yourself, that quality is increasing in you. It's the opposite of jealousy and envy and competitiveness and feeling of failure and anything like that. There's no need to feel a failure. Just think of people who succeed and rejoice in it. There's a notion. So mudita is a really important quality. So you're wishing this for yourself, and you're also wishing that others would also enjoy that and to develop that quality. So then you come to the last one, which is equanimity. And this is really emphasizing the universality, that it's equal for all beings. So how could you have equal love for all beings? It seems a bit like, you love your children, you love people close to you, you love people who are good and kind, but then you come across people, crowds of people that you don't know at all. Would it be realistic to say you felt love for them? You don't even know them. And then you notice actually they're crowds of people that are actually hostile. That actually, a person is hostile to me. What would love for them be? I feel scared. I feel frightened of them. I might feel angry, indignant. I don't feel love. So what would it mean to feel love equally for somebody who's behaving like that and for somebody who's, really supporting me and is like a mother to me or a father to me? Or how can it be equal? So then you start to question, well, so what's love actually? And this takes us back to Khalil Gibram's description of love as not being in time. The love is actually our Buddha nature of openness, clarity, sensitivity. It's not in time. Love isn't in time. And in a way, time is not broken up either. Like his sense of what's happened in the past, what's happening in the future is all included in now. It's not that you've broken off now, cut away the past, cut away the future, and now it's now. It's like now includes the whole past and the future. I think he expresses it so beautifully, doesn't he? So there's that love is the same. It includes all the past and all the future. So when you see a being, it's not like in this moment you've cut out a bit of the universe and said, I love this person, and here he is now, and then he's going to die. No, I love the whole person, past, present, and future, all of a piece. All their past lives, all their future lives, all our connections through all those lives, it's all of a piece. And then it becomes possible to love others equally. Okay, this lifetime I don't know this person. But actually, if I could see the whole thing, I would realise I've had loads of connections with everybody. So the fact I'm not at this lifetime in a particular world and point of view where I'm not seeing them, they are still equally who they are, and in essence, each of those is a Buddha. Each of them is not in time. Each of them is boundless love. And it's beautiful the way he put time and love together. That love is like that. It's boundless. Who doesn't know that their capacity to love isn't boundless? It's a really challenging question, isn't it? Who doesn't know that at some level? Because as soon as we see that our love has changed, we know it wasn't really love. It was just attachment. If it doesn't change, that's when we know it is love. It's interesting, isn't it? So like a mother with a child can't really tell, is this attachment or love, until the child leaves and then, or does something that they don't like, and then you realise you still love that child, then it's love. If it changes, then it was attachment. And usually it's mixed, isn't it? It's usually a mixture. There's some love and, well, probably there's mostly love, and there's either a lot of attachment or a little attachment. So this realizing, if you can actually let go of all that attachment to views that arise from, not really recognizing that openness, clarity, sensitivity, and being able to just rest in that with confidence, then you're grasping at views. As soon as you grasp at views, it's no longer equal for all beings. So the connection, you can see the very close connection then between love, universal love, equal love, and recognizing subtle grasping at views, which we call emptiness, which sounds rather like maybe almost it can sound intellectual, but actually it's totally emotional. It's totally emotional. Grasping at views is totally emotional, even though we then turn it into an intellectual story. It's actually an emotional reaction. So then equalness is when there's that emotional reaction we've actually been able to see clearly enough to not react like that. And then when we see other beings, we would see Buddhas. We would recognize our own nature, but even more importantly, rather than focusing on ourselves as Buddha, we would actually see others as Buddha. So how joyful is that? You're back to your love. Equal love for all beings, totally joyous. Every being you met would be Buddha, completely. And it's an odd thing that they don't recognize it. Right? How come they can't recognize it? And that's the compassion, because then they realize, that beings need help. So they wouldn't, they'd recognize what's causing that, why they're not recognizing it, and they recognize why they're not, and then they try to teach them. So that's their compassion. And of course, the Buddhas rejoice in anything we do that's good, that's taking us towards enlightenment. It's like we've always got this sort of parent there that's really delighting in every little good thing we do, because they care. They really want us to be happy and to follow this path to awakening. So every time we do something good, we're pleasing the Buddhas. They actually are pleased. We say that we're trying to please them. It's not because they're hard to please. It's because they really are pleased. There's this real response from the universe of, oh, good, getting it, making some progress. Even though we don't see any progress, just the thought that the Buddhas are pleased can be quite a joyful feeling, can't it? May whatever I do, may it please the Buddha or please the Guru. Yeah. And to get that sense, it's been noted, it's pleased somebody. Even if nobody else saw, the Buddhas saw. And often we do things, don't we, that are, especially when we're practicing Kshanti, patience, and we're not reacting. And sometimes we put up with things, and it's like nobody sees. But if you sort of think, oh, but the Buddhas would see, and they would have been pleased to see me not reacting. So there's that feeling. Yeah, it's all of a piece. The Buddhas aren't separate from us. So there's the whole of the Dharma there in those 4 apamanas, isn't there? So how would you actually practice them? I mean, there's one way in which you could, in your meditation session, as you set yourself up for the meditation, you could set yourself up reminding yourself of the 4 apamanas, even spending some time reminding yourself. Or if you've never really reflected on them, maybe spend some sessions really reflecting on them so that you get a real feel for what they're about. And then actually they make quite a good little chant. As I said, cleaning your hands, may all beings be happy and have causes of happiness, may they be free from suffering, the cause of suffering. Even if you haven't got time to reflect very much, they've got a happy feel to them, haven't they? And then if it's running through your mind all the time, some flavour of them will carry with you all the time. And because it is your nature, there's something in you that's always going to respond to that. So it's a good way of practicing, daily life awareness or mindfulness, bringing your mind back to the Dharma. Just keep reminding yourselves of the four apamanas. And then, of course, you've got the Metta Sutta, which reflects the same. I mean, everything I've said, you find it in the Metta Sutta. The Metta Sutta starts with talking about what it is to be a happy person, really, and upright and honest and not over busy and contented, satisfied, sort of gentle, sort of harmonious. So the qualities that you imagine in somebody who embodies love and compassion, just thinking about those qualities, again, it's like mudita. If you think about a person like that, that starts to develop in you. You start to communicate that to yourself and others just by thinking about it. Rather than saying, oh, I should be like that. But of course you do notice, oh, I'm not like that. And then you might think of how you might change your behavior. That's sort of thinking about it more. Or you could just do the two. Let it permeate you as a wonderful quality, and then you'll automatically start to try to be like that. And then you can think about how you're not like it and how you could change your thinking, which is more like what we describe as the Lojong teachings. They change, what is it? Training the mind. Lo is more mind, changing the way you think. So exchanging yourself for others instead of thinking me all the time. You know, am I all right? Am I getting what I want? Am I making progress? You know, am I doing this right? Am I a failure? You know, it's very much concentrated on yourself. Just change it. Concentrate on others. You know, whatever suffering I have, may it be taking the sufferings from others. Whatever good I have, may it benefit others. Just keep changing your thinking all the time, and then it makes it sort of takes away some of the obstacles to recognizing the naturalness of love and compassion. I think there's a danger you could get too intensely conceptual about it if you take it in too heavy a way. But if you take it in a light way, notice your own negative thinking, change it for completely the opposite, to a ridiculous degree even, to just kind of challenge your way of thinking. Notice it is thinking. And it is a view, and you can actually let it go. And then ultimately, then you don't need so much contrivance. But this is sometimes they call this relative bodhicitta when it's contrived like that, because it's helping to counter wrong ways of thinking, that are quite gross wrong ways of thinking, which we do encounter, even though in our meditation we might have deep insights and feel that we do understand to a large extent what is openness, clarity, sensitivity, what is that clarity, emptiness of the bodhicitta, and feeling, sort of I'm really making progress. And then somebody does something and you get incensed. And then however much you try to remember your high view, still your mind's going bang, 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 your mind is going on. So, okay, so now let's just try relative bodhicitta. Let's just try looking at that way of thinking and just cutting through it by doing the opposite. So if I want to close off and sort of hide away and not stick my neck out and feel bad about myself and I'm getting more and more uptight, then just think, oh, okay, I'll take on I'll take on that from everybody. I'll take it all on. Sort of like get it to the point where it's ridiculous, and then just go and send out happiness to others. And it's something inside you screaming, I can't do that. I don't know if you notice that, but I notice that in myself. I can't do that. I'm too angry. I'm too fed up. I'm too whatever. I can't do it. And you think, that's thinking. It's just a view. I've got this, I'm holding on to a view that I can't do it. If I look at that, I can't do it as thinking. I don't have to think that. So what's stopping me? And then actually suddenly, oh yeah, I do wish everyone to be happy. I can actually, if you're a visual sort of person, you might even like to send it out like light. If you're a visual sort of person, you might think, oh, this is all so dark and horrible. Yes, okay, let's take it on. And then to kind of make sure you don't stay in this, you get it very intense, but to make sure you don't just kind of stay there, you use the breath to make that sudden switch. So you don't just stay there and then wait for it to go away. You just, as you go in the out breath, you just let it go. It's really challenging, that, isn't it? Can you do that? Can you actually allow yourself to go into the negativity and then let it go just because you're breathing out? It's really challenging, isn't it? But those kinds of practices, we can talk more about it during the course. I'm doing a series on love and compassion, so we can talk more about those kind of practices at another time. But I wanted to base us in this sort of fundamental, these four immeasurables, and that they are actually reflecting our true nature. They are our Buddha nature, and it's out of time, and it's not contrived. So anything that we're contriving is a method to connect to what's not contrived. I think that's basically what I wanted to say today. I don't know if anyone's got an immediate question. Have we got a little time?
We've had one question online now.
Okay, yeah.
B, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you can unmute yourself, it might take me a while to find you.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Who is?
I just want to ask, as a healthcare worker, how do you reach out to alleviate suffering and show love and compassion without fear of risk?
Yeah, I think this is where you have to really consider sustainability. Like, if you're going to be working over a long period and helping as many people as you can, you do have to take care of yourself so that you can maintain that situation where you can be helpful. Whereas if you take risks that actually would mean you would not be available then to help other people, you've got to actually be able to accept that you're going to have to make choices like that. But when you've made a choice like that, maybe you've had to not do something for somebody, and that means that they've had to suffer the consequences of that. It's really important to not let yourself think, oh, when you think of them, you just think of the fact that you hadn't helped them. So drop that and when you think of them, think about how you can actually make a strong connection for them, that connect them to the Dharma or connect them through love and kindness. So you still feel love and kindness for them, even though you've made the judgment that actually I can be more helpful if I take care of myself so that I'm there to do whatever good you're going to be doing in the world. But in the person that you've, if you like, abandoned temporarily, telling yourself, I haven't abandoned them, because now we have a very strong connection, and I will keep that connection through all my lifetimes. I will always help this person when I meet them, and may they be safe, may they be happy, may whatever happens to them be a step forward for them on the path to enlightenment, or any sort of pranidhana or munlam or wish you can make for them, and keep that very positive connection, because you're not going to be able to help everybody. However much you take risks, you're still not going to help everybody. I don't know if that addresses your question.
Yes, thank you. That is helpful to think about that as a connection with somebody and not always have to kind of put the fear before the compassion, which sometimes is a struggle.
Right. Yes, because the risk, not taking risks, that fear isn't always a negative fear, is it? It's sometimes the guardian that's telling you, if you extend too much here, you're actually jeopardizing the whole mandala, the whole situation, so that you're making a decision. And so it isn't fear for yourself exactly, it's more protecting the whole mandala, really. So if you recognize that, then you can maintain that sense of you are caring for the person, even though you're experiencing the emotion of fear, but actually it's an expression of compassion, and maintain it with the person with whom you're, in a sense, you feel you're not doing as much as perhaps you would have done, or you want to do. So maybe I can read another of his poems. If there's no more questions, are there any more questions?
There doesn't appear to be online.
I could ask a question.
Okay,
No one.
you ask a question.
Oh, hang on. Someone online.
Thank you.
Mingyu, is that you?
Yes, is that okay?
Yes.
So you were mentioned, thank you very much for the teaching. You mentioned, so my question I think is about, if we think about love for all beings, then one way of viewing, one contemplation I've had is viewing animals that are, we think about the animal realms, and they might be in a state where for them their happiness is around survival and being predators, or animals that we might have an aversion to instinctively. And so then the way of viewing that, the way I've viewed that is also think, well, they're in that state at this moment, they're in a certain realm, or they're in and in this life that is where they're at, and I can still include them, bring them into my love for all beings and my wish for happiness for all, wishing that they perhaps are reborn in a higher state or something like that. And then I suppose conceptually the animal realms can apply, I think, when we look at different states of mind we might find ourselves in as humans. So my question relates to your point about views, and am I then making a mistake to sort of say, well, I think there's so much trauma history in this person's life that they're in this angry state, or they find themselves in such horrendous circumstances that they would pick a fight in an empty room, this sort of thing. Is that then just a wrong view? I'm sort of, is that a view? Or is
That isn't what's meant by view here. Suffering is suffering, and if you see suffering and you see the cause of suffering, that's actually seeing the cause of suffering. That's the first noble truth, isn't it? So you can see that this being is actually creating suffering for themselves, and you want to do something to help them. You can't say, oh, if you think anything, that's a view, then you would be, you wouldn't be able to accomplish anything. So thinking something is not a view, but it's quite subtle, and this is why it's difficult to teach the Dharma, because we're using the same word view, but of course we always have a view. We always have a point of view. That's our intelligence. But when we attach to a wrong view about the nature of, for example, you see this person is in a very bad state and you think, look at them, they're in a bad state. I'm glad I'm not one of them. I'm not like that. That's a view, because you're holding on to the idea I'm like this and he's like that. Whereas if you look at the other being and you recognize he is like me, he has the same nature as I do, and he's making the same kind of mistake I make, and he's having the suffering I would have if I made that. And therefore that actually leads to opening and feeling of compassion for the person, doesn't it? So that's not a wrong view, that's a right view, really. Yeah, I think sometimes we have this tendency to say, oh, well, you have to have this non-judgmental awareness. I think that's quite misleading. It could lead to really stupidity, really. It's the judgmental there is supposed to be non-grasping awareness. So you recognize, an animal is an animal, or a human being is suffering because of the way they're behaving or have behaved. So that's not suffering. That's seeing the causes of suffering. And so that's not really judgment in the sense of wrong view. That's intelligence. But then when you actually stick it as, like, oh, I'm not like that. Oh, they're like that. They're inferior to me. Then you're getting into you can feel the difference, can't you? One of them is opening out into love and compassion. The other is closing down into a fixed view about myself and my own, my own self-importance and my own greatness. And that's where somebody doesn't want my compassion. They don't want my pity because, I've created this view. And I think that's the kind of judgmental that we're trying to avoid. That's what we're working on letting go of. It's an important point. I'll read this poem then because it's really lovely. Love has no other desire but to fulfill itself. But if you love and must needs have desires, let these be your desires. To melt and be like a running brook that sings its melody to the night. Sounds very happy, doesn't it? To know the pain of too much tenderness. To be wounded by your own understanding of love, your own understanding of love. And to bleed willingly and joyfully. To wake at dawn with a winged heart and give thanks for another day of loving. To rest at the noon hour and meditate love's ecstasy. To return home at eventide with gratitude. And then to sleep with a prayer for the beloved in your heart and a song of praise upon your lips. Beautiful, isn't it? To bleed willingly and joyfully. So, Trungpa Rinpoche talks a lot about the wound, doesn't he, and the pain of the soft spot. To bleed willingly and joyfully. That's amazing, isn't it? Not just willingly, but joyfully. Yeah. To be wounded by your own understanding of love. Yeah, like others who maybe don't understand love like you do. So you feel the wound because of your own understanding of love. Oh, it's really beautifully put, isn't it? So there you go. It's all about love. We dedicate this punya to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening. May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully. Chancha samni rinpoche ma jepanam jejejik jeba nyamba mapadang kone kondu pelwa sho. Chancha samni rinpoche ma jepanam jejejik jeba nyamba mapadang kone kondu pelwa sho. Chancha samne rinpoche macha panam jajajik jaba nyamba mapadang kane kandu palwasho. I just realized I didn't finish what I was saying about the Metta Sutta, about as a practice of how you actually develop love and compassion by expanding out to all beings in all directions and near or far and so on. I meant to, but there you are. I forgot. Got carried away. So, thank you everybody for coming. It's felt wonderful to have you all here in our little shrine room.
We've had 100 online here on Zoom, and Dashi says between 39 and 45 on YouTube. That's like nearly 150 altogether.
Goodness. Wow. The modern technology. It's amazing, isn't it? Thank you, modern technology, for making this possible.
They made it possible. Each playing their part. Let's see who's there. Oh, Jean. How lovely. And who have we not seen before?
Jacques Javert.
Jacques Juppé, right.
Yes,
Fiona.
Rinchen.
Rinchen, yeah, great.
Sally.
And Billy.
Jane and Bee.
And Jude. Oh, Jude. All right.
Zilpa.
Serpa. And then Andrew and Jessica. Jean again. And Linda. You've just seen these people.
Myla.
Samson there. Andy Wallace again. Yeah, great.
A few more screen cameras.
Sarah Jono. No. And Terence. Do we know Terence?
I think Terry and Lynette might be from Chester.
All right. Then I saw Meba and Kate and Dagmar again. Lovely. Oh, lovely. Dagmar did see.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Consign down in Cornwall.
Huh?
Consign down in Cornwall now. She's
Yeah,
in
Kansang, yeah.
town.
Katja, Emma. Oh, Emma. Hi. And Giles, Loshi, Vicky, Dawa, Benjamin. I know Benjamin.
Not at the moment.
Senge. Suyakita. And Selingma, Belinda again. And Padma Yogini and Steve. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Hope you're feeling better.
Yeah.
Great. Namka and Omma. What's her name?
Oh, she's been here.
Oh, I remember, yes.
Is it Jamie?
And Jamie.
We have 2 more pages. Would you? Sorry, it's taking quite a long time, everyone.
Jar City and Kato.
Oh, great. And Tempo.
Looks relaxed.
Fantastic.
Oh,
Ingrid, New Urza. Oh, right.
Maggie Nellen,
Oh, and another one of Jean.
Sharon Chillian.
Ayesha. All right. Doji. Sharon Doji and then Cheyenne. Maggie and Alan. Oh, look, everybody's there. William.
Guillaume.
Hi. And Kathy Ibbotson. Dejan, Jane Hastings. Ayesha. I know Ayesha. Leonie.
There she is. Oh, she's made
Oh, there
herself
she is.
visible.
To see you. And David Hall again, look.
Yeah.
Serene, Lean, Mark. Hey, Mark. Somebody Mark. Jane, Sid.
Dechen might be Lucy.
Oh, yes, Lucy. Yeah. Gosh, that's a lot of people. Oh, there you are, you're 2 more pages. And Elizabeth. Do I know Elizabeth? Kathleen. Christina Bramble.
Malam
Hula.
in Argentina. Oh, lovely.
And there's Joy again.
Yes.
Peter.
Peter.
Peter
Susie Q.
Siskiyou. Rachel.
This is such fun, isn't it?
There's a message here from Linda, and she says, thank you for wonderful teaching, and she spoke to you in Bowdon last April.
Oh, right.
Ah.
Oh, lovely to meet you again. Yeah.
Sylvia's got a lovely screen.
Yes. Sylvia, which Sylvia?
I don't know.
Sylvia.
I'm not sure.
There's something. And Dayton. And Bay. Oh, thank you for coming, everybody. And I hope we meet again on screen or in for real eventually.
Minga's made a suggestion which might cause confusion, but if you all press your space bar now and say goodbye, we'll see what happens.
Bye, thank you.
Oh, lovely.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.